If you think the modern obsession with productivity hacks and morning routines and, you know, optimizing your entire life is some new disease created by social media, consider this. 3,000 years ago, an ancient Egyptian actually wrote a papyrus scroll begging his friend to stop stumbling around smelling of beer and doing acrobatics on walls.
Yeah, literally doing ancient parkour on the pyramids instead of getting his life together.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate proof that the struggle to just be a functional, focused human being is definitely not a new phenomenon.
No, we have always been looking for a way to fix ourselves. So, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we have a massive stack of sources lined up just for you, and it is a really eclectic mix.
It really is.
We're pulling from like ancient historical texts, cutting-edge neurobiology, time management strategies of top-tier CEOs, profound spiritual wisdom, and even a highly specific government tech training initiative.
Which sounds completely random, I know, but
Right. But our mission today is to sift through all of this and construct an evidence-based blueprint for your own self-improvement. We want to cut through the toxic noise of hustle culture and find the underlying mechanics of what actually works for you.
because when you look at human nature across millennia, I mean, you start to see very clear, undeniable patterns in how the brain operates and how success is actually manufactured.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we're going to build this blueprint for you today, we actually have to start by looking backward. We need to understand that this desire you have to be better is it's basically a fundamental part of the human operating system.
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
the term self-help was officially coined in 1859 by a guy named Samuel Smiles in a best-selling book, but the literature of advice goes all the way back to the Bronze Age.
Right, like the Egyptian codes of conduct we just talked about.
Exactly. But moving forward in classical Rome, you had Cicero writing these extensive handbooks on personal behavior. You had Ovid writing The Art of Love, which was essentially, a first-century gating guide on how to be sociable and network.
I was actually reading through that source, and the funniest part to me was that Ovid wrote a sequel called The Remedy of Love, which is like a step-by-step psychological guide on how to fall out of love when a relationship turns toxic.
Yeah,
It's basically a Roman guide to going no contact.
it is. And it wasn't until the 20th century that Dale Carnegie really triggered the modern commercial boom with How to Win Friends and Influence People. But the core mechanics of human change, they've been studied for thousands of years. And what all these texts point to is one central engine, which is the subconscious mind.
So let's talk about the mechanics of that, because we hear the word subconscious thrown around a lot in, cheap self-help seminars. But based on the research here, the subconscious is basically like the background operating system of a smartphone, right?
That is the perfect analogy, yeah.
Like, we think we're consciously driving the car, tapping the screen, making all these logical decisions, but the OS is actually dictating what apps can even open based on the code we fed it.
Precisely. The conscious mind is just the user interface, but the subconscious is the actual code. And true personality development only happens when you rewrite that code.
How?
Well, the sources reveal that the subconscious doesn't understand logic or willpower. It understands thought pictures, like vivid imagery. If you want to change your reality, you have to bypass the conscious mind entirely and feed the subconscious these visual commands.
But the conscious mind is notoriously stubborn. I mean, it's constantly doubting us. So
Yeah.
how do we actually bypass it to install this new code?
The research highlights two very specific biological windows for this. The 30 minutes right before you fall asleep and the 30 minutes immediately after you wake up.
Why those specific times, though? Like, what is actually happening in the brain?
It all comes down to brainwave frequencies. So during the day, you are in a beta brainwave state. You're alert, you're analytical, highly critical. Think of beta as this massive firewall. It rejects new programming because it's trying to keep you safe and predictable. But as you fall asleep and as you wake up, your brain transitions through alpha and theta states. These are slower frequencies where the analytical mind is relaxed.
So the firewall is down.
Exactly. The firewall is completely down. If you vividly visualize your goals during those specific windows, the thought pictures slip right past the critical faculty and sink directly into the subconscious.
You are basically sneaking the new code in while the IT guy is asleep.
That's exactly it. And once the subconscious accepts that image as a truth, it starts subtly altering your behavior. Those thoughts become microscopic actions, the actions become routines, and those routines ultimately rewrite your life.
That makes incredible sense, but it also presents a massive problem.
How so?
Well, if our subconscious is our operating system and the firewall comes down every morning and every night, what happens if our minds are filled with chaos? I mean, I don't know about you, but my brain isn't exactly a serene, positive landscape. If we don't tame the conscious mind first, aren't we just going to accidentally program our subconscious with, like, anxiety and malware?
That is the exact trap most people fall into. And their instinct, when they realize their mind is chaotic, is to go to extremes. They think, my brain is too loud, I need to force it into submission. But the sources contain a very severe warning against this,
Like what?
particularly regarding things like 10-day silent Vipassana retreats.
Wait, pause there, because I see people bragging about these silent retreats on social media all the time. Isn't Vipassana just sitting quietly and meditating? How on earth is that dangerous?
So Vipassana is an ancient, intense form of meditation where you sit in absolute silence, usually for 10 days straight, just observing your bodily sensations. If you have no foundational practice, it's incredibly jarring. Yeah, the text uses this brilliant, terrifying analogy. They compare jumping straight into a 10-day silent retreat to snatching a milk bottle from a baby and throwing them into a wrestling ring with a professional fighter.
Oh, wow. You're just going to get instantly crushed by your own untreated thoughts.
Exactly. We use external noise, right? Our phones, our work, our social lives to distract ourselves from our internal unresolved traumas and anxieties. When you remove all that external stimuli for 10 days, every single buried thought comes screaming to the surface.
That sounds awful.
It can be. If you haven't built the mental scaffolding to handle that flood, it can actually induce severe panic and psychological damage. Instead, the sources advise starting with simple foundational anchors.
Like what? Just like basic mindfulness.
Basic breath work, or focusing on the 7 energy centers, the chakras. And not necessarily in a mystical sense, but simply as physical focal points in the body to give a racing mind a place to land. Because the sheer volume of noise we are dealing with is staggering.
Yeah, that.
Studies in the sources point out that we have up to 6,000 thoughts a day. And a massive portion of those are what psychologists call ANTs, automatic negative thoughts.
ANTs. They just crawl in, multiply, and completely hijack the system. Now, the sources suggest a very specific method for exterminating these ANTs. They recommend writing down the exact negative thought that is bothering you on a piece of physical paper and then literally setting it on fire with a match.
Right. Or writing it on a whiteboard and physically erasing it.
Yeah, but I have to push back on this. Do people really think writing down a bad thought and burning it actually does anything? Isn't that just, a placebo trick, some kind of parlor magic?
I mean, it sounds like it. But there is profound neurobiological power in physical release and ritual. Think
Yeah.
about it. When a negative thought is just bouncing around inside your skull, it feels infinite. It has no edges. It feels like it is you. By writing it down, you are forcing your brain to translate an abstract emotion into concrete language. This moves the processing from the emotional center, the amygdala, to the logical prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
You are externalizing the threat.
You're taking it out of your head and turning it into an object on a desk.
Exactly. And when you physically burn it or erase it, you are providing your brain with definitive visual confirmation that the object has been destroyed. It's a sensory experience that breaks the neurological loop. It provides closure. It basically signals the nervous system that the threat is neutralized.
Okay, I actually love that. You are giving the OS a tactile, undeniable delete command. And this concept of mental discipline, of, not being controlled by the chaos of your thoughts, is heavily echoed in the spiritual texts we looked at too, specifically the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, the Gita offers a really fascinating framework for this. It teaches that the mind is the ultimate double-edged sword. It's capable of being your greatest ally or your absolute worst enemy. But its solution for taming the mind goes completely against modern hustle culture. The Gita advises doing your duty without being attached to the results.
Which is so incredibly difficult for us today. I mean, we are conditioned to be obsessed with the outcome. The metrics, the quarterly review, the likes, the promotion.
Because hustle culture tells you that your worth is entirely defined by the result. But the Gita argues that your worth is found purely in the execution of the action itself. It emphasizes accepting that change is the fundamental law of nature, and that suffering comes from trying to freeze a moment in time.
That makes a lot of sense.
It actually aligns beautifully with another source we looked at, citing Nietzsche, who famously wrote, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." It's about reframing hardship not as a punishment to be avoided, but as like a mandatory resistance training that fortifies the mind.
So if we take a step back, we've learned how to clear the malware with physical rituals, we're practicing detachment from outcomes, and we know the OS is most vulnerable right before sleep and right after waking. How do we practically apply this optimized mindset to the finite 24 hours we have every day? I want to move from the internal landscape to the external clock.
The clock is where the theory becomes reality. And the sources are incredibly prescriptive here. Architecting your day begins with aggressively protecting your morning. They outline a foundational morning routine.
Let's not list a dozen different habits, but what are the absolute non-negotiables? What actually moves the needle physiologically?
The first two are silence and hydration. Waking up to 10 to 20 minutes of complete silence. No podcasts, no news, just letting the brain boot up slowly, followed immediately by warm lemon water.
See, I always thought the lemon water thing was just like a pretentious wellness trend for influencers.
A lot of people do, but it actually serves a critical biological function. You just went 8 hours without fluids. The warm water rehydrates the brain, which is 73% water, by the way, and the citric acid from the lemon jumpstarts your liver enzymes, flushing out toxins accumulated overnight.
Wow, okay.
It is a biological ignition switch. But the most important rule of the morning routine is what you don't do. You absolutely cannot look at your phone immediately upon waking.
Which brings us right back to the brainwaves. If you open your phone while you are still groggy, in that theta state, you are dropping the firewall and letting the algorithm directly program your subconscious with outrage, comparison, and anxiety.
Precisely. To combat this, the sources suggest a strict 60-day challenge. For 2 months, you commit to 60 minutes of zero social media, 60 minutes of dedicated deep learning, 10 minutes of reading, and guaranteeing yourself 8 hours of sleep.
That is a massive behavioral reset. But what I found fascinating in their research is that they don't just tell you to lock your phone in a drawer. They actually offer a psychological hack to weaponize your phone addiction for your own good.
Yes, using the law of attraction on your lock screen.
Right. Think about how many times you absentmindedly tap your screen to check the time. 100 times a day. 200. The sources suggest making your lock screen a highly specific picture of your primary goal.
Yeah.
If you do that, you are effortlessly flashing a positive thought picture to your subconscious hundreds of times a day. You are hijacking your own bad habit and turning it into a visualization engine.
It's brilliant. And they take it a step further with auditory programming, too. They suggest recording voice notes of your goals and playing them back to yourself during those relaxed morning and evening windows.
But why record it yourself? Like, why not just listen to a motivational speaker?
Because of the psychology of self-recognition and bone conduction. Neurologically, your brain is hardwired to trust the sound of your own voice above absolutely anyone else's.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, when you hear yourself speaking your goals affirmatively, this subconscious bypasses skepticism much faster. It accepts the statement as an established truth.
I am definitely doing that today. Now, taking this from the morning routine into the workday, the sources dive deeply into how top-tier CEOs actually manage their time. Because the brutal reality is that most people don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because of what the sources call time poverty.
Time poverty is the invisible killer of potential. You feel constantly busy, yet you accomplish nothing of substance. To defeat this, successful people use ruthless prioritization. The sources highlight Brian Tracy's magic wand method.
Explain that one, because it really forces you into a corner.
So you write down your top 10 goals. Then you imagine you have a magic wand, but it only has enough power to grant you one of those goals instantly. Whichever one you choose is your true overarching priority. The other 9 are essentially distractions until that first one is achieved.
It strips away all the illusion of multitasking.
Yeah.
Which leads directly into the concept of deep work versus shallow work. Deep work is distraction-free, high cognitive concentration. Shallow work is the logistical stuff, email, Slack messages, meetings about meetings. The sources suggest prioritizing deep work by eating the frog, meaning you identify the absolute hardest, most dreadful, highest impact task, and you do it first thing in the morning. You eat the frog so it doesn't hang over you, draining your mental energy all day.
And while you are eating that frog, you must single task. The sources note that leaders like Bill Gates use meticulous time blocking, and Oprah Winfrey insists on absolute single tasking.
I need you to define a term that popped up in the research here. The sources say multitasking is a myth and warn about the cognitive switching penalty. Is that just the brain fog I get when I jump from writing a report to checking an email and back again?
That's exactly what it is. The human brain physically cannot process 2 high-level cognitive tasks simultaneously. When you think you are multitasking, your brain is actually micro-shifting its attention back and forth rapidly. And every time you shift, there is a penalty. It takes your brain roughly 23 minutes to fully refocus on a complex task after an interruption.
23 minutes just from checking an email.
Yep. That lag time, that loss of cognitive horsepower, is the switching penalty. Single tasking preserves your brain's processing speed.
Okay, so we have the theory down. We've optimized our morning, we're hydrated, our lock screen is set, and we are single tasking our deep work. But eventually, the protective bubble pops.
It always does.
We have to interact with the chaotic outside world. We have to navigate the corporate office, deal with bosses, interact with coworkers. How do we protect this pristine mindset we just built when we were surrounded by office politics?
The workplace is where all of this theory is violently tested.
Hmm.
And the sources provide very strict tactical boundaries for office survival. They outline 5 specific things you should never share at work to protect your peace and your position.
I was looking at that list. It says never share your future career plans, your salary or debts, your health issues, your politics, or engage in gossip about higher-ups. The one that actually surprised me was keeping your health issues quiet. It feels very counterintuitive to the modern corporate mantra of, bringing your whole authentic self to work.
Well, that modern mantra is often an illusion. The sources warn that sharing detailed health issues, especially chronic ones, can unconsciously shift how management views you. It can be weaponized during promotion cycles because human beings have a subconscious bias toward perceived reliability.
That makes sense, sadly.
Even well-meaning bosses might pass you over for a high-stress, high-reward project because they assume, based on what you shared, that you just can't handle it.
That is dark, but incredibly pragmatic. And the rule about not sharing your salary or debts?
Money is the ultimate proxy for value in a corporate structure. Sharing your salary breeds instant resentment if it's higher than appears, and sharing your debt signals desperation. It alters the power dynamic and changes how people negotiate with you. You have to protect your leverage.
But protecting your reputation is really only half the battle at work. The sources issue an incredibly severe warning about protecting your actual life. They dive into the physiological dangers of burnout and hustle culture.
It is a lethal danger. The texts introduce the chilling concept of karoshi, a Japanese term that literally translates to death by overwork. We are talking about people who push themselves so relentlessly in the name of productivity that they suffer fatal heart failure or strokes right at their desks.
That is so.
The World Health Organization estimates that 750,000 people die globally every single year from overworking.
That statistic is horrifying. 7.5 lakh people. And a lot of self-help books use this cliche metaphor of a melting candle to describe burnout. Like, don't burn the candle at both ends. But reading these sources, I think a much more accurate metaphor is a smartphone battery.
Ooh, I like that. How so?
If you constantly leave a lithium-ion battery plugged in, running at maximum capacity, overheating while using a dozen apps, the battery doesn't just run out of juice for the day. The maximum capacity of the hardware actually degrades permanently. It will never hold a full charge again.
That is a brilliant way to frame it, because neurological burnout physically alters the brain's architecture. An overworked brain becomes dulled, the prefrontal cortex shrinks, and the amygdala, the fear center, enlarges. Rest is not a luxury or a reward for hard work. It is a strict biological requirement to prevent permanent hardware degradation.
And when we don't rest, when that battery is degraded, we start making disastrous decisions. The sources illustrate this with a parable about a woodcutter.
Ah, yes, the story of the woodcutter and his son. The father is an exhausted woodcutter resting after a grueling day of labor. A fly keeps buzzing around his head, tormenting him. His son, wanting to help and act decisively, grabs a heavy piece of wood and swats at the fly with all his might.
And obviously the fly effortlessly buzzes away, and the son ends up bludgeoning his exhausted father in the head with a log.
Precisely. It demonstrates how a lack of patience, coupled with impulsive, frantic action driven by exhaustion, leads to catastrophic consequences.
Think about how perfectly that mirrors our behavior at work when we are burnt out. When we are exhausted and operating with a degraded battery, we lose our strategic clarity. We just start swatting flies with logs.
Yeah, we really don't.
We send aggressive, emotional emails. We make careless errors on big projects. We damage critical relationships over minor annoyances.
We mistake frantic movement for meaningful progress.
Exactly. So if we shouldn't swat flies with logs, what should we do when we step back? How do we channel that 60 minutes of daily learning we talked about earlier? The sources don't just leave us with parables, they actually provide a highly specific, real-world antidote to shallow work. They highlight an initiative from the Tamil Nadu government.
Yes, the Vetri scheme. It is a fantastic example of applied deep work. It's a free 18-week course in 5G communication technology deployed across 12 districts specifically for graduates in ECE, EE, and CSE fields. And the critical metric here is the outcome. The curriculum is designed to lead directly to potential salaries of 4.5 lakh rupees.
I love that this is included in the sources because it grounds all the theory we've discussed. It is so easy to get lost in the ether of, visualizing your success and burning your negative thoughts on a piece of paper.
Right.
But those neurological practices are just preparation. They're meant to clear the malware and charge your battery so that you actually have the focus to sit down, endure the cognitive strain of an 18-week technical course in something as complex as 5G, and materially alter your financial reality.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the CEO mindset. The government provides the structure, but you have to supply the mental discipline. You need the tamed mind, the protected morning routine, and the strict boundaries against burnout to actually execute those 360 hours of training. It perfectly synthesizes internal mindset with external high-value upskilling.
This has been an incredible journey today. For you listening, think about the ground we've covered. We started with the realization that the urge to fix your life is thousands of years old, dating back to Egyptians scolding their friends for doing acrobatics on walls. We've looked at how your subconscious operates like a smartphone OS, vulnerable to programming only in those precious alpha and theta windows before sleep and after waking.
We examined the neurobiology of breaking negative thought loops through physical rituals and the severe danger of jumping into advanced mental practices like Vipassana without a foundation.
We explored the biological necessity of morning hydration, protecting your brain from the algorithmic programming of social media, and how to weaponize your lock screen. We decoded the cognitive switching penalty that ruins your focus, the dark reality of workplace overwork, and the necessity of choosing structured, deep upskilling over frantic, shallow hustle. The underlying message across all these diverse sources is clear. True success is not an accident. It is a carefully architected combination of a protected mind, ruthlessly structured time, and continuous, focused execution.
It is a profound realization when you see the underlying architecture of human behavior laid out like this. But I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much of our lives and so much of our energy obsessing over what we need to add to our routines to become successful. We think we need a new habit, a new app, a new supplement, a new 10-step plan. But considering everything we've unpacked today, from the ancient wisdom of outcome detachment to the modern necessity of single tasking and protecting your peace, what if the ultimate life hack isn't about what you add? What if the real secret is fiercely deciding what you have the courage to subtract?
Wow. It's not about downloading more features to the OS. It's about deleting the malware so you don't end up exhausted swatting flies with a log. Think about what you can subtract today. Catch you on the next deep dive.